Hello, my name is gdrazenovic, and my topic of discussion today is understanding the Mirai botnet. This is for week 11, November 5th. So in order to understand the Mirai botnet, we need to understand three different things, I feel. We need to understand how this particular botnet changed the face of security. We need to understand the fundamentals of how this botnet, how it worked. And the third point is we really need to understand the future and how we as an organization, we as professionals are able to protect our place of employment. So the day Mirai grew up, or how IoT botnet grew up. So on October 21st, there was a botnet in the order of 1.2 terabytes that had taken down the DYNE network. Now what we see here is the impacted areas for that day. So the DYNE network included companies such as AWS, Twitter, SoundCloud, etc. The interesting thing about this particular botnet is it impacted the infrastructure of the internet. So DNS lookups. So how can an organization, how can individuals connect to AWS if they cannot resolve the IP address of that record? And that was we saw the DYNE network overload the DNS infrastructure, but we also saw that other organizations were taken down as a crossfire. We'll later learn some of the motivations. Minecraft, which was my kid's favorite game. So why was the Mirai botnet a game changer? Well, it had crushing power. So when you looked at the botnet that happened with DYNE, you had a 1.2 terabyte attack. Now you had 400,000 IoT devices that composed, that sent the amplification denial of service attack onto that infrastructure. So the crushing power was unparalleled to what we had seen. And up until then, we saw big attacks in the range of 10 to 20 megs. Oh, sorry, correction, 10 to 20 gigs. For most organizations, a 1 gig, even a 100 meg attack, depending on the type of attack, will take down that organization. So what we were seeing is 40 to 50 times larger than the bigger attacks that we have been seeing. It also had the ability to take out not just a single IP, but a subnet. So most organizations have a /24, which gives them 256 IP addresses. A DDoS of attack of this size can hit that full range and be able to take down all the services, not just a single. So it made us rethink how we as cybersecurity professionals protect our organizations, because up until then, one of the defenses was to black hole the information, black hole the attack to a single IP. So you have at the ISP, you have the ability to pick up the phone, call the ISP, anything going to this IP, just black hole it so it goes nowhere. So when it does hit the organization, you're only seeing clean traffic. That was no longer the case. It had the ability to take down systems on the way to its target. So as it was taking down one of the infrastructures, it would hit routers on its way and taking down those systems as well. We will truly never know the full scale of the 1.2 terabyte attack. Some security professionals say it's 2, 3 times that. It was very difficult to measure. It required a new way for us as cybersecurity to think about defense. You know, we like I said, we could dark black hole IPs, we could increase bandwidth, we can add scale to our organizations. With such a crushing, devastating attack, there's no way in order for us to address, to just think about those old defenses. And the other thing was the innovation. So when we think about the IoT botnet's variants fighting for supremacy, what we see here is that the innovation. So once the code got leaked to the internet, we saw variants starting to cannibalize the other IoTs. And so now we started to see innovation happening at a rapid scale. And they also unified the internet in terms of the security experts. Our security experts would now be able to, it brought bonds between private sector. What it also did is it brought the governments together, and it brought about standards that we as cybersecurity professionals are starting to abide by. So it really changed the mindset of how we protect our systems, how we manage our systems, how we protect the internet. So who are the people behind the attack? There were three people. Anna Sapai was the code name used, but the individual behind that was later prosecuted, Para Gia. So Para Gia was the mastermind behind the attack, a 21-year-old Rutgers student. He wrote much of the code, and we'll go over how the code was written. Josiah White, he was the individual, a friend out of Pittsburgh, who ran the botnet. And then you had Dalton Norman, who was the fellow who was working on zero-day exploits. Again, trying to, rather than using passwords to attack people or to compromise devices, they were now looking at zero-day exploits, so using a software-based mechanism. But in order to understand why they did this, you need to understand, we need to understand the motivation behind these three individuals. Now, they didn't do anything crazy. They just had a good idea, right? A simple idea. But the reality, what they were trying to do is they were trying to build a business. They were trying to monetize the botnet. So the way they monetize is, one of the first slides we talked about is Minecraft. So Minecraft is a cottage industry. We have approximately, it's a $27 game. There's about 122 million subscribers, and monthly users is close to about 55 million. So an individual who ran a decent server for this Minecraft ecosystem, what they could generate on average, maybe in the summertime, $100,000 a month in revenue. So what's happening is that these people were now reaching out to other organizations to protect them from DDoS attacks. So what we saw here was we had an individual set up an organization to prevent DDoS attacks, and then what he had to do, he was able to sell the service, but in order to create demand for that service, he took down other providers. So we had the French internet host OVH that was taken down. We also had Proxy Pipe, a San Francisco-based organization that was taken down. And you can see some of the language there in the tweets that ProTaf had put out there. Affordable DDoS protection for any network of any size, and rethinking how we do DDoS. Now, there's also another attack. So the attack wasn't just financially motivated. Now we started to see grudge attacks. So Brian Krebs' website was down for 4 days because he wrote a particular article published, DDoS mitigation firms have a history of hijacks. So the major milestones that I see it is between September and February, September 2016 and February 2017, there was a total of 1,194 DDoS attacks that were attributed to Mirai. Now, this wasn't just the individuals who set this up. What we see is a variance of DDoS attacks when the code was released. So in August, we saw the code release, or the Mirai botnet was discovered by malware Muscat. And then what we saw in September, we saw two major attacks. We saw the Brian Krebs attack, and then around the same time, we saw the OVH attack. Both attacks, ordered huge in nature, 660 gigs. OVH had two attacks, one at 1.1 terabytes, and the other one at 901 gigabytes. So up until then, what was happening is the cybersecurity professionals, law enforcement firms started knocking on the doors and trying to figure out who was behind the attack. And then we see that the code was actually dumped on September 30th of 2016. And the reason behind that was to guarantee that law enforcement was not able to identify the creators of the botnet. So had they gone in on premises and seen that they are the only ones that had the source code, they would be an instant way of prosecuting these individuals. However, if they released the code, and then all of a sudden, it's much more difficult for them to prosecute. So there was a sense that the FBI was after them at that point. What was interesting is that between the time that they released the code and the time Mirai hit, we saw an attack 3 weeks later at the 1.2 terabyte size. Now, the individuals, the Cub Scout pack was actually not responsible for this attack, meaning that there was a variant which is yet to be prosecuted or released that created a botnet in that three-week period that was able to have this crushing effect. So that's the time scale that we're dealing with. We also saw Deutsche Telekom, another variant, take down that ecosystem, taking down the routers. Now this one is actually believed to be a misfire, a misconfiguration of the Mirai botnet. So again, the variant out there, they feel that it hit them for 2 days, 1 million subscribers offline. So how does the Mirai botnet work? So the CNC, the command and control up there, has the ability to affect the first device. Now the first device that gets compromised has the ability to scan the internet at 127 devices per second. So you think about it, if one device gets compromised, it is now scanning the internet 127 times per second, looking for other devices in which they can compromise. So that's the speed at which we're looking at. And then you start to look at the amplification attack. You see that these devices can be, very, very quickly we can have attacks happen. So when a device actually finds a device that is actually a potential target, what it does is it will actually use a set of passwords. Now, originally started on 40 passwords and it ended up being closer to 62 passwords. And we'll see the passwords used in the next slide. But what happened is it would identify, can it create a login? Now, you're talking about webcams, you're talking about anything that's an IoT device that's running a Linux-based operating system for the most part. It is looking for that device and it is trying to log in. So once it's able to make that connection, it reports it to the report collection server. And then that report collection server sends a message to the CNC, sends it to the loader, and then you get a push or a pull of malware that gets implemented onto the new victim. And once it becomes part of once it becomes a victim of the software, of the malware, it becomes part of the cloud. The interesting thing about the scanning process is that once the scanning process begins, it doesn't hit all the IP. So for example, it doesn't hit local IP addresses used on networks such as 10.0.0.0. It doesn't hit the US Postal Office. It doesn't hit the Department of Defense. So there was some judgment used by the attackers to target certain IPs on the internet. For example, it would not use multicast addresses as well. Once part of the botnet, the attacker could send a message down to the entire botnet and it could launch a series of 10 different DDoS attacks. And we'll go through those 10 different DDoS attacks shortly. But the thing to keep in mind, how they kept their secrecy is really important. So they use something called DNS fast flux. So DNS fast flux is a way in which there was an IP, a DNS name cnc.changelog.com used for the devices to connect to gain the instructions. Once they got the instructions, then they were able to take those instructions and apply whatever force. But what DNS fast flux does, it uses a weakness in the DNS infrastructure. So for secondary IP addresses, they have a way in which every 60 seconds they can change those IP addresses. And so even though the DNS name itself didn't change, the IP addresses did at a very frequent, at a high frequency. Now these DNS servers were typically residing in non-developed countries where there's less laws. They also used the Tor network to communicate for this infrastructure. So the Tor network had privacy. And the way in which they protected their infrastructure is that once they infected a bot, they would then look to shut down things like Telnet and SSH so that the infected would not be uninfected or be infected by one of the variants. So So these are the 62 passwords that were used. As you can see, many of these are default passwords, and the default passwords are typically don't change. Some of them are done by the manufacturer. Some of them are done by are just lack of management. And these are the IP address ranges that were not included. So looking at the DDoS attacks. So there's three types of attacks that we see out there in the industry. A TCP state exhaustion attack, where it just basically, it does not overload the system in terms of traffic, but it overloads the CPU, the memory, and the lookup tables. So we see in the industry, according to Netscale, 16% of DDoS attacks are TCP state exhaustion, 32% are application-based, and 42% are volumetric in nature. So when we look at the 10 different types of attacks that Mirai had, so this is interesting because they could change the attacks frequently. So you can start off with a SYN attack, which is a TCP exhaustion attack. They can create a three-way handshake, but they never finish the handshake. Or they send junk, to the handshake, which causes, again, more CPU. Then the TCP stomp is a simple, is a simple text-oriented messaging protocol, very similar to the SYN type of attack, but it's a TCP handshake attack, and it just sends random information in terms of the message. And then we have the HTTP flood, which then takes down the system in terms of overloads the websites. UDP is a connectionless based protocol, and what we see here is there are two different types of UDP attacks. One is the UDP flood, and one is UDP flood with less options. What was interesting about the UDP flood with less options, it was less complex, but it had 10 times the impact. A GRE Ethernet and IP attack, these were the largest attacks. These were likely used at the Dyn botnet. What it is, it's a tunneling protocol, so what it does is it, on its way to the attacking site, what happens is that it's usually, because it's encrypted, it just gets bypassed by the internet routers. So it's a very efficient way of attacking an organization. And the VSE flood, this was your Minecraft attack. So this is where it's overloading the system with requests. So historical and future timelines. So we have to understand that the first botnet that we saw was Blue Pill, so Cybot in 2009. But at the same time, 2009, we saw this internet search engine for IoT devices and network appliances on the internet show up. So this is a site that's nicknamed Google for Hackers that gives you pinpoint accuracy. If you're looking for a particular webcam, if you're looking for a particular IoT device, this will inventory it openly. And you can subscribe and download the list. We see this later on with some of the variants that happen. But now you can have pinpoint accuracy. GAFT, botnet, again, attacking routers, DDoS, and then so we see an evolution. GAFT, became the predecessor to DDoS, and DDoS became the predecessor to Mirai. And so as we see the industry evolving, we're seeing these attacks evolve, or the systems itself evolve. So Mirai comes around in October 2016. We have the variant. Then we have, in 2017, Hedgem. So Hedgem is rumored to be a white hat. So this was done by ethical hackers trying to shore up compromise weaknesses in devices, and it would actually go off and patch or shore up some of the weaknesses in some of these IoT devices to reduce the further spread of this industry of these types of attacks. But we see an evolution here. We see that rather than using a command and control single point of failure, we now see a torrent-based system where we see a peer-to-peer network where the heads now you can take down the head and then one will just continue to pop up. We see IO Reaper, again another variant. What we have in 2017 is an estimated at 8.4 billion IoT devices out in the industry. Now we see in 2020, 1.2. And we have an estimated by Rose at 2016, so we're seeing potentially 100 billion devices. That was Rose in their article in Chaplin, IoT of Everything in 2015. What is interesting again is that we're now seeing evolution. So we see the Bitcoin mining variants. We are seeing things like clickbait, where clickbots, where they're actually going in and using clicks to monetize advertising revenue for organizations. Then we see in 2018, we see 5 major types of attacks. One of them being OMG. OMG is a fascinating attack because an IoT device now can become a proxy. And what I mean by that is you can have a wearable device, you can have a device like a speaker that's connected to the internet, and you bring that into your organization, and once that device is inside your organization, you can now take that and it can become the vehicle and the proxy, bypass all your systems and infect your systems from the inside. So why are IoT so powerful? Well, they have about the same amount of traffic as a desktop, slightly less, but now with IoTs and CPUs, they're getting very quick. Attack traffic, again, comparable to PCs. It's an always-on technology, so these things are always on. The security is always an afterthought in most of these designs. There's a lack of maintenance. There's a set it and forget it mentality, and there's a lack of malware protection, both on the devices and on the network. So how do we protect our organizations? There's the traditional systems. There's these DDoS prevention systems. If you want to protect yourself from an onslaught of an attack, you can subscribe to Akamai. You can subscribe to all these various different technologies to have inline protection. You can have a reactive session where you call a provider and they will redirect your traffic through a GRE tunnel. But the number one thing that we as cybersecurity professionals need to think about is patching. And what I want to leave you with in terms of patching is that today we treat IoT devices as single devices. When you look today at organizations, you look how we as cybersecurity professionals manage firewalls. The way we upgrade patches on firewalls is that we will do we'll have a cluster of 2. It will break the cluster. We will upgrade one of the nodes. Then we'll bring that one up. Then if it looks okay, we'll bring up the second node. We'll upgrade the software, and then we'll rejoin the cluster. Today, IoT devices are thought of as individual devices. As an industry, we have to think about how are we going to take these systems and how are we going to patch them effectively. And so when you talk about ICS organizations, we need to think about how we architect the IoT devices moving forward. And there's got to be a system to patch these systems and a way to manage them. The other thing about the different types of attacks that we have out there is that the Mirai botnet attacked the Linux-based operating systems. Now, when you think about Linux, well, we as ICS professionals, there are other operating systems out there, other embedded operating systems. So, for example, we have Riot OS, which is used primarily for sensors and actuators boards. We have Wind River, which is a robust operating system which is focused more on the industrial and medical industries. We're looking at Nucleus. So Nucleus real-time operating system, right? It has a 3 billion base of IoT devices out there. And so focused on industry, consumer electronics. We have Green Hills Integrity real-time operating system, which is focused on aerospace, defense, automobile, industrial and medical. So Linux is more of a multifaceted operating system. I think when we start to talk about ICS, when we start talking about Internet of Things, it's really important that we focus in on items such as embedded operating systems that are purpose-built. So looking at the statistics worldwide, what we're seeing is in 2015, 61 billion in spending in IoT. We're looking at about 246 billion by 2020. Correct, it is 2020 IoT spend. So in conclusion, what I wanted to leave you with is the fact that the Mirai botnet was named after the Mirai Nikki, which is anime out of Japan. Why it was named after that was the miscreants had used an individual's PC in France, and he had this particular anime show that he was watching at the time. Why it's fundamental is that when you think about the actual anime itself, it's a Hunger Games that's based out of Japan. It's a smaller Hunger Games version, so with a single winner, with everyone trying to take everyone out. That's essentially what's happening with the IoT botnets. So the IoT botnets themselves, they're fighting amongst themselves. They're trying to reinforce supremacy. There's this evolution. There's this growth within the industry, within the innovation, within the botnet. So we can consider that this is going to continue. Each combatant on this particular game can see the future. Well, we're trying to anticipate the future. We're trying to see where the industry is going. And the outlook is quite scary, to be perfectly honest. Where there's all the variants. It has not gone down. The attacks keep on coming. And innovative ways, and like Bitcoin mining and click fraud. And then the last point is really you have this psychopathic individual that's tracking the main character. Well, we as cybersecurity professionals, we have this psychopathic killer, which is the